Hello, and welcome back to Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds, How America Culture Came to Be, the podcast of the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia. I'm Alex.
And I'm Rachel. Today we have Paige Hildebrand with us, and she's going to be talking about a topic near and dear to her heart, largely about the formulation of early grammar schools in England. So, Paige, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I got my bachelor's at the University of Mary Washington and then went on to obtain my master's in medieval studies at Bangor University, which is located in Northwest Wales. There I worked to narrow my focus on education in the late medieval period, which encompasses everything from about 1300 to 1500. So my thesis looked specifically at the importance of the Catholic Church in education during the 14th and 15th centuries. While I was looking into this, I found an article written by medievalist Nicholas Orme. In it, he spoke on what is called free grammar schools. Basically, a free grammar school is the first version of what we see now with the American public education system. Those who lived in a town or village that the school was situated were allowed to come into the school to learn. The main issue with the structure, which I'll get into more, is that the books, the clothes, and supplies still needed to be provided by the family.
So, go a little bit more in depth. What is the background of free grammar schools?
So, when many people think of education in England, they tend to think of the universities like Oxford and Cambridge. While these are excellent examples of English education, the universities do have more of a religious root, whereas free grammar schools, which I'm going to be talking about, kind of move away from that. For example, the first recorded that we have education going on in Oxford is about 1096, while the records do not explicitly note what is going on during this time. One of the names that come out as the instructors is Robert Pullen, and he was an English theologian in the 12th century. In 1167, King Henry II forbade basically any Englishman to attend university in Paris. And this is where many of the medieval chroniclers, which is where we get most of our record, attended university. This decree basically rapidly expanded the English education system. Approximately 60 years later, you have the religious orders, such as the Dominicans and the Franciscans, who start founding communities in Oxford. While not all students went into the church and some actively fought against it, there was still a fair amount who went to university with the explicit intention of going into the clergy. What we see now is kind of a top-down type of approach in terms of education. Boys were often tutored within their own homes or sent to a monastery for their primary education, but in 1382 something changes. William Wykeham founds Winchester College, which becomes the first free grammar school. 2 years later, Lady Kathleen Berkeley founds Watton-under-Edge. Now, as far as I can tell, Winchester College was founded around the same time as New College in Oxford, also known as the College of St. Mary of Winchester. And Winchester was specifically meant to prepare the intendings for continuing their education at New College. Watton-under-Edge, however, was founded with the intention of replacing the Latin speakers who had perished during the first waves of the bubonic plague in the 1340s and 50s. These two schools were in the minority of educational institutions until about 1405, 1406, when in a statute issued by King Henry IV, he stated, "Every man or woman of what estate or condition that he be, shall be free to set their son or daughter to take learning at any manner of school that pleaseth within the realm." Is after this statute that Eton College, the first secular school to be founded by the English monarchy, was created. In the following decade, the number of free grammar schools founded increased dramatically. This founding of schools continued throughout the rest of the 14th and into the 15th centuries, only halting when the War of the Roses broke out between the Lancastrians and the Plantagenets in 1455. Throughout the next century, there are some free grammar schools established, but nowhere near at the pre-war rate.
So that's really fascinating. That's pretty much the opposite of what most people expect, that in England, that early on, that we're talking about in the 15th century, that women and girls were allowed to go to school, that there was no prohibition against their learning, which is not what public knowledge tends to think.
So when you look at the historical record, the women will actually, there's a large number of works that were written by English women. You have Marjorie of Kemp, you have Julian of Norwich. And both of them we don't know much about Julian of Norwich, but Marjorie Kemp, she was raised as a merchant's daughter. She knew how to at least read. We don't know if she actually knows how to write at this point, but she at least knows how to read. And so a lot of women during this time period, when they were being educated, we see them being educated more within their households or within convents. There was no statutes to prevent women from being educated. It was a lot less seen during this time period, but it did happen. We have a lot of English mystics during this time period. We also have a lot of women writing poetry. We have a lot of women working with the Arthurian legend, but that also kind of encompasses France, so it's not specifically an English phenomenon.
Also, we've got earlier of Hildegard von Bingen, who kind of started off the trend, and of course she was a widely regarded mystic for being female, and she did do her own writings. Yes,
and so that's where Julian Norwich comes in as well. She did do her own writings. She was basically the female version of a hermit. She was in seclusion most of her life. All of her mysticisms, she physically wrote down. She did not have anybody scribing for her, which is where we come in with the Marjorie Kemp. We think her son was being her scribe, but also during this time period, what is really interesting to note is that women were boys' first teachers. They were the ones that while they were still young, they would be the ones teaching them how to do all of the basics. So they would work with primers. They would work to kind of work with them to increase their penmanship skills, stuff like that. So it's a lot of the record that we have is with women of upper class. So that is not going to be 100% true to the entire population in England during the 14th and 15th centuries.
But it does seem like more merchants would have had access to some form of education, be they male or female.
Yes.
So when talking about establishing a school, what does this entail?
So there are only a few things that each grammar school really needs when it's established. The first is an area to instruct in. The second are the schoolmasters, what we would now consider teachers. And the third are the pupils or scholars. To get a sense of what the numbers are like, we can look at both Winchester College and Watton-under-Edge. The first free grammar school was founded by William Wyken in 1382 and supported 14 clergy, 2 schoolmasters, and 70 scholars or students. When Wycombe first founded the school, it was not entirely separated the church, as seen by the support of the 14 members of clergy. But the first school to immediately completely break from the church was Lady Catherine Berkeley School in Watton-under-Edge, which supported a single schoolmaster and 2 scholars. But any child from the immediate area could come and learn for free. So basically, when we say a scholar, these are the people that are either paying to be there or they are there on what we would consider a scholarship. So poor scholars would be the kids that would come from outside of the community into it and stay at the school. All right, so what these terms mean is that for Watton-under-Edge, there's 1 teacher and 2 students that were paid for by the Berkeley estate. And the children that were in the surrounding villages would be allowed to attend the school at no cost, but were not obligated to attend. What Nicholas Orme points out, though, and I mentioned this towards the top of the episode, is that the books, uniforms, and supplies still needed to be provided by the family that were part of the community within the school. This did cause some issues with children attending, because even if they could attend, if their uniforms were of poor quality, if their books were extremely secondhand or missing things, they would be bullied. Bullying is not a uniquely 20th and 21st century phenomenon. it would have happened here, and that would have deterred some of the children coming to school. All of the things needed would not come cheaply to the average peasant family, and oftentimes they could not afford it. You do have to remember that Gutenberg did not come out with the movable type in Europe until about 1440, and Caxton, his English counterpart, did not start working until the 1470s. So in the 1300s, all the people who had full books would have been using vellum, with all text copied over onto it, which was time-consuming and expensive. There are reports from the University of Paris that tell students using parchment that was left over from the makings of a book and copying over the text from the book that from the library if they had use for that text. In the grammar schools, any practice would have been done with slate and chalk.
So just to clarify, what's the difference between paper and vellum and parchment?
It's the type of materials that it's made out of. So vellum is calfskin. So after, at any point in history, pre-industrial revolution, they used absolutely everything that they could off of an animal for anything. So they would basically soak the calfskin in something that was acidic. Urine was extremely popular. And they would go through a process and stretch it and kind of make it thinner, and they'll do this over and over again until they get the same consistency. Parchment and vellum are the same thickness. They are slightly thicker than paper. Paper is made out of fibrous material, usually from some sort of wood. The main difference here, though, is that paper during this time was more susceptible to degrade. A lot of the materials from the 18th century, some of the record materials we're starting to lose those because the acid in it has completely dissolved the fibrous material in it. Whereas parchment, because of the materials that are used, it does not degrade.
So can you tell us a little bit about grammar schools in the Elizabethan area, getting closer to our era?
So anytime you talk about Elizabethan society, you need to consider her predecessors. In 1529, King Henry VIII irreversibly, I would argue, changed England. This being when he broke from the Catholic Church and annulled his marriage to Queen Catherine of Aragon, and established himself as the head of the Anglican Church. Starting in 1536, Henry started the dissolution of the monasteries, which took away one of the options for boys to be educated, and one of the only options for young girls to be educated, as well as we talked of previously with women. One of the main ways that women could be educated was through convents. So the dissolution not only took away the power from the religious orders, but also decreased the number of options for young people in England to be educated. What is also important to note is that during this time, there were no major changes in how a church service was conducted. Vestments were still worn, Latin was the primary language that was used, and much of the Catholic doctrine was still followed. From the time that Henry VIII started the dissolution of the monasteries to his death, that was only about a decade. He died in 1547. His son, by his third wife, Jane Seymour, Edward VI, took the throne at the age of 9. His reign, however, only lasted 6 years, was marked by political and social change. Raised as the first fully Protestant monarch, there were different ideals between the people of England. Some wanted to go back to Catholicism, some wanted stricter teachings, we now call these Puritans, and some wanted to kind of stay in the middle of the road. What Edward's reign did do for the Reformation and the Anglican Church was introducing the Book of Common Prayer in 1549. The Book of Common Prayer basically establishes a set of prayers and rites that all clergy would use. What is most important, however, is the fact that it was written in the vernacular, so it was written in English instead of Latin. The goal of this was to help increase audience participation within church services. When Edward died in 1533, at the age of 15, his half-sister Mary took the throne. Mary, as the daughter of the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon, was a devout Catholic. During her short reign, which lasted about 5 years, England was once again Catholic, as she remained the head of the English church, basically. she converted it back to Catholicism. She spent most of this time working to undo the policies that her father and half-brother put into place and restore the relationship with Rome. What we don't see too much is a refurbishment of the religious institutions that were destroyed during the early parts of the Reformation. Then finally, in 1558, Queen Elizabeth took the throne of England. What she did is what we call media via, or the middle road. And she took this view in her religious policy. She basically took parts of Catholicism, parts of Edward's Protestantism, and combined them in a way that worked for most of the English citizens. While Catholicism itself was still outlawed, the difference between the Catholics and Protestants were far less noticeable than in Edward's reign. For example, the Book of Common Prayer was reinstituted, but the crucifix was also allowed in churches instead of the simple cross that Edward's church required. If you want to read more on the changes of the daily life in the English people during this period, I would highly recommend Stripping of the Altars as well as The Voices of Morbath, both by Eamon Duffy.
So you have a story about a school that is very close to where our English farmhouse comes from in Hartlebury.
So after going through all of that history, we now have the Hartlebury Elizabethan Grammar School. Now, Alex, best guess, when do you think the school was founded?
Now, since you said it was the Elizabethan Grammar School, I am going to take a wild guess that it was formed during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, so sometime in the later 16th century, maybe 1680, 1690.
So the actual answer is that we don't really know. What we do know is that the school was founded with religious roots in the pre-Reformation era. Near the location of the school sits the bishopric of Worcester. And the best guess historians have is that it was founded in the second half of the 15th century by one of the bishops who resided there. Most of the information that I have comes from a transcribed book titled The Old Order Book of Hartlebury Grammar School, 1556 through 1752. This book was published by the Worcestershire Historical Society. The foreword of the text gives the known history of the school, and where they say, and I quote, Queen Elizabeth did not therefore found the school, she only remodeled it at the advice of Edwin Sandys, Bishop of Worcester. Gives its statutes and a charter. With that in mind, however, it's important to note that it is with this charter that the written history of the school starts. We see how the community took an interest in the education of the students that went to the school. There were collectors who went around and collected a sort of tax for the upkeep of the school, and that is what the text that I mentioned above covers. The Old Order also sheds light on how the school system post-Reformation could have operated. This book acts as a ledger of sorts. It informs us who was the collector, the amount they collected, and from whom they collected it from. From this book, we can see that the two examples I gave earlier are not how this particular school is run. It actually operates more like the schools we see today. Taxes noted as rents in this text are collected from the community and used for the operating cost of the school. In total, the school requires about £45 a year to operate, which is the equivalent of just under $27,000 in today's U.S. currency.
The English farmhouse comes from Hartlebury. We know that it was built in 1631, and the person who built it, his name is John Smith. Now, we believe John Smith might have been a widower at this time, and is only one surviving relative, his daughter Cecilia. Cecilia married a local farmer called Edward Woodhouse, and we have a copy of John Smith's will, and he gives everything to Cecilia and Edward Woodhouse. And in this will, he lists his grandchildren, and there are 6 grandchildren, and he actually puts the age of the grandchildren, which is very helpful because it corresponds perfectly to the parish records. Of the 3 boys, there is an Edward, and he is the middle child. The oldest is John, named after the grandfather, and unfortunately he dies at 12, which makes Edward the heir to Cecilia and Edward Woodhouse's estate. We know he takes the farm over in 1682. And when he does that, one of the interesting things about Edward Woodhouse is he never marries. And we believe his younger sister and her husband, Robert Fitkin, are with him on the farm. The farm is a very significant yeoman farmer. It's not a poor yeoman farmer. We don't know the size of the farm. We always speculate. But when you look at the inventories of both Edward Woodhouses, it becomes very evident that they are plowing or tilling 20 to 40 acres, sometimes even 60 acres, which is way beyond the capacity of the family to do, which means they are hiring lots of laborers to work on the farm, which indicates that this is a very significant farm, which also indicates that on certain years when you have a bountiful harvest, you might be making a lot of money. And that is kind of important because the next thing that Paige is going to talk about sort of corresponds to the fact that Edward Woodhouse Jr. is a very wealthy yeoman farmer.
The first mention of Edward Woodhouse, the patriarch of the family who was living in the house at the time, was in April of 1686. Here he is noted to have paid the tax for the school, which was £14 as the initial tax. The next year in February, he was appointed as one of the governors of the school. The best way to think about the governors of the school is that they are the equivalent of like the school board or the superintendent, the overall board that kind of runs the day-to-day operations of the school. They oversee the mechanics of running the school. This spans the collections of rents to making sure any staff, for example, the schoolmasters, are paid, to make sure that any other expenses are taken care of. This includes things like rebuilding the chimney, which happened in 1689, purchasing coals, and mending walls. The taxes that are collected are typically collected from 10 to 14 households, one of which is the Woodhouse family. What the text does not mention is how many households were renting under the land-owning members of the community. So if anybody had other people living on their land and they were collecting rents from them, it does not say that. It only mentions the land-holding tax-paying members. So not all the rent money was coming straight from those that are listed in the text. 1699 gives us a clear understanding of what the fixed cost of the school looked like. Mr. Pierce, who was the schoolmaster at the time, received £32. Mr. Hancock, who is the usher, received £10. The rent for the land that the school was on cost about 1 shilling. The usher is something I haven't mentioned yet, simply because not every school has one. Typically, ushers are like the primary school teachers. They would instruct the youngest children in the basics of school, but didn't necessarily have the experience to be the schoolmaster yet. So it was kind of a stepping stone for a lot of people in their careers. While we do not have a direct account of the materials in the school, we do know that there were some books associated with the grammar school. In 1694, 5 shillings were allocated for chains for the books already in the school's possession. The next year, there's a record of the acquisition of a chain for a dictionary. We don't know when this dictionary was brought in, just that's when they had bought the chain. They use those to kind of make sure all the books are staying in the shelves, to keep them nice and snug, so then that way they don't expand. Parchment has a tendency of, whenever it gets very damp, to expand, and that's why whenever you see them in libraries on the shelves with chains, keeping them there.
Think Harry Potter and the lock on the book of, monsters that Hagrid required.
Yes. That's actually a great analogy. One fascinating instance that I saw while I was researching this, which isn't necessarily true to every school, but it kind of gives a view of everyday life within schools, is that in 1690, there was a lawsuit involving the school and William Norris about the leasing of the land around the school. We don't know what exactly the lawsuit was about, just know that it was surrounding that land since William Norris was the owner of it. So here's a quote from the text. Says, "Whereas there is suit between William Norris of Rushock and the governors of the Free Grammar School of Queen Elizabeth and Hurlbury about a lease which the said William Norris holds the land in Rushock appertaining to the said Free Grammar School of Queen Elizabeth in Harlesbury. We, the governors of the said school, whose names of subscribe, do hereby assent to and consent mutually and jointly to defend the suit on behalf of the said school, and in discharge of the trust reposed to us, to raise money amongst every man to pay his equal proportion toward the charge and expense of said suit. In witness whereof we have hereunto put our hands and affixed hereunto our common seal, the day and year written above. The lawsuit was William Norris and the governors, who are the defendants. What it was exactly about is unclear, but based off the first part of that statement, it was about the rents associated with the school. The lawsuit looks to have gone on for more than 2 years, with the expenses of the solicitor taken out of the school's finances. When it finally concluded, Mr. Norris deposited £58, 7 shillings and 6 pence into the school funds, and that was not until February of 1693. Edward Woodhouse remains in the written record until 1704. It is extremely likely that he leaves the record in 1704 because he died the following year, in 1705, at the age of 49. According to the Hartlebury Historical website, when he died, his estate was valued at £297, which is approximately 170,000 USD today. But that it does not necessarily mean that is what his lands were worth. That could have just been things that were listed in his inventory within his house that would have been passed down, not the land. The land would have been valued at a much greater price.
All right, well, thank you, Paige. That was very informative, and it's really cool that your research actually turned up information about the house we have here at the museum from this time period and how the Woodhouse children probably did go to that school. Edward may have actually gone to that school as well before he became one of the governors later on. So thank you so much. We're glad you got to join us.
Thank you for having me.
So we hope you enjoyed Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds. We bring you historical episodes twice a month. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you.